Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nick Nanos.
Nick, we're again in a very tense diplomatic showdown with China. We expelled a Chinese diplomat and China has retaliated. Where do things stand? How do Canadians feel about our relationship with that country?
Not too great, Michael, not too great. We just finished a survey and we asked Canadians about a series of countries, including China, and asked them whether they were, we could have a positive or negative kind of, whether they be positive or negative partners. And, check out the numbers. So not a big surprise to look at who's at the top. You can see United Kingdom, 86% or thereabouts think that they'd be a positive or somewhat positive partner for Canada. Germany actually scores quite well, 80. The United States, 78. France, 74. Go to the bottom, as in the very bottom. There's China, 11.
Wow.
Michael, 11.
11%.
11%. Yeah. So you can see almost 3 out of every 4 Canadians would use the words negative or somewhat negative to describe China as a potential partner with Canada. So it speaks to how strained the relationship is between Canada and China. And you know what, Michael, this is more than an issue for diplomats now. Like, walk down the street, 3 out of every 4 Canadians when they hear about China just have negative connotations right now. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Nick, in terms of allegations of foreign interference in our elections, it just seems like every day there's a new allegation, a new headline. The Liberal government has asked David Johnston to look into this, and I suppose in about a month's time, he's going to decide whether or not there should be a public inquiry. What do you see as the next step, the next phase in this?
Well, I think the government has already told us what the next step was, because they've expelled the Chinese diplomat. The Chinese have expelled the Canadian diplomat, like the tit for tat. But how can we not have an inquiry after that? Because basically the federal government has said, yes, there is some sort or foreign interference does exist. And they have this example with the Chinese diplomat. So I'm not sure how David Johnston can come out with anything other than a recommendation for an inquiry. But you know what, this thing cuts both ways, because this isn't just about diplomacy. It's going to touch other areas, and it's not just about the Liberals. Although for the Liberals, one of the problems that they do have on this particular file has to do with the funds received by the Trudeau Foundation that is separate from Justin Trudeau. And obviously he was not directly involved in anything, because that is a separate organization that is separately funded. But it's just not good in terms of the associations that people will make between the Trudeau Foundation and Justin Trudeau, and the optics. Just the optics are not good for that.
China exerts, a huge amount of influence in Canada, as do many other countries. Is it fair, I suppose, to single them out when American lobbyists are very much active within Canada, as are many other countries?
Well, I think it's fair to talk about foreign interference, and other countries such as the United Kingdom and the United States do have requirements for people to disclose when they're kind of advocating or working on behalf of any kind of foreign country. So I think now it's a no-brainer. Some of our major allies are doing it. Canada needs to do that too. Whether we need to single out China over other countries is a completely different matter. But the thing is that the China-Canada file, and what I'll say, the China-US file, the China-UK file, the China-Germany file is hot. And there's a lot of sensitivities right now to China and its activities. But the reality is, Michael, to your point, countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, all engage in activities that advance their interests, many of them transparently through diplomats. They support educational exchange with Canadian universities. They fund research at Canadian universities transparently. They hire lobbyists transparently to help them with stuff. So, I think the issue with China, at least, is that their approach to influence just might be a little different than what
Hmm.
we see for a lot of other countries. And I think that's why there's such a focus on China. But the reality is the United States is into, whether you want to call it foreign interference, they're into foreign influence because, and you know what? Canada around the world does the same thing. We go to other countries. We have arrangements with other academic institutions. There are Canadian enterprises that fund research in other countries. We have diplomats kind of working on our behalf. So, the thing is that it's the way the world works. But I think for China, they're at the top of the list right now, just because of some of the things that could be perceived of as being unsavory in terms of how they're trying to advance their interests.
Now, Nick, every Canadian government has to walk this tightrope in terms of trade with China, which because they're an incredibly huge economy, a huge potential trading partner for us, and potential human rights abuses. Standing up against that while continuing to try and forge these business ties. I think about the Chrétien era, this sort of charm offensive in China, and now with the Trudeau government, despite all this, Canadian businesses are still trying to expand into China. It always just seems like such a huge political risk for us.
Absolutely. Well, it's a massive political risk for us because we're an export dependent country, and economies like China and the United States are not just important, they're critically important to jobs and prosperity and productivity and in Canada. And they're also sources of investment, foreign investment. There's, foreign investment in Canada helps create jobs, foreign investment from around the world. So, we have an exceptionally high kind of threshold of interest when it comes to this. But the fact of the matter is, the Clinton administration was very positive on China and opening up relations. It kind of it asserted, and many other leading G7 countries asserted that trade would be the gateway to dialogue. It would be the gateway to change in China, where they would, perhaps be a little more focused on democratic values. But it hasn't happened. For all the talk about, let's have closer relations, and that it'll be, trade liberalization will lead to political liberalization.
Mm-hmm.
Face it, that hasn't happened, period, full stop, in China. And I think some would argue that it's actually been the reverse, that the Chinese have benefited from the liberalized trade, but there's been no spillover effect in terms of the environment in China. But Michael, Canadians still want cheap goods, right? And as a result, China is still a very powerful force in the world economy, and a player that you just can't avoid.
Nick, just to go back to Canadian politics, with all these headlines, I'm wondering if it's having any impact on the ballot tracking for the federal parties.
Well, it's interesting when we look at the trend, especially over the last while. It hasn't been favoring the Liberals at all. When we look at our latest ballot numbers, the Conservatives are at 35, Liberals 28, NDP 22, Bloc 7. You can see that Conservative numbers have actually been steady, right? But where the change is the Liberal numbers. They're down. And, whenever the Liberal numbers have anything with a 2 in front of it, it's not good for the Liberals. And, 28-22 between the Liberals and the New Democrats, if that becomes like 26-24, which is basically a statistical tie, we're into the old scenario, Michael, kind of like under Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair, where the progressive vote splits. And this is the perfect scenario for the Conservatives, the splitting of the progressive vote. What the Liberals have to hope for is that, maybe people are disaffected with the Liberals right now, but perhaps when the election is called, whenever that might be, that those progressive voters hold their nose and vote Liberal to strategically block Pierre Poilievre. But right now, look, they've had a visit from Joe Biden, which usually helps the numbers of the Prime Minister, right? Whenever a U.S. president visits. They had a budget, which is an infomercial. They also had a Liberal policy convention, infomercial number 2. And what are we seeing? The numbers for the Liberals slide, and the Conservatives enjoying a 7-point advantage, which is quite significant.
Wow. Nick, I want to drill into this and get into the battlegrounds and how those have changed, but we're going to take a quick break first.
Okay.
So, Nick, we see from the latest ballot tracking that the Conservatives have a 7-point lead on the Liberals now. And I'm just curious how things have changed in battlegrounds.
Wow, it's just not good news for the Liberals. So we do see projections every month. And what's interesting is that we can see that I think the Liberals, there are about 29 seats that are at risk for the Liberals, with the Conservatives and the New Democrats both being beneficiaries. The Liberals basically are down everywhere except Quebec, where they have a little bit of a pickup, and in the prairies where they're flat. But Michael, in the prairies, the Liberals aren't strong anyway. So for them to be flat in the prairies doesn't really mean too much. But we see basically Liberal ridings that are in play or at risk in Atlantic Canada, in Ontario, and British Columbia especially. And those are massively important battlegrounds for the Liberals. But check out this map. This is Toronto. We always talk about Toronto, the Golden Horseshoe, the 905 belt. So, what you can see here, on one side of the map looks quite red. That's the last federal election. A lot of red in Toronto and the GTA. Check out the other map. So the other map, if you see something that's black, it's the margin of victory. It's too close to call because it's less than 2%. If it's gray, it's 2 to 7%. But check out all the ridings that are basically now in play. Ridings like, in the Oakville and Mississauga area, ridings, in the Durham area, in a riding like Cambridge, which was a Liberal riding, or should we say is a Liberal riding. But now you can see the Conservatives could have a pickup in Cambridge, and Cambridge has gone back and forth. It has been a Conservative riding in the past, both federally and provincially in Ontario. So, looking at this battleground, like Battleground Toronto, I think the Liberals have to be thinking about their strategy and how they're gonna try to hold on, because they're in a minority position already. Losing seats in Toronto just is fundamentally bad news for the red team. And there are some critical suburban ridings, the Mississaugas, Oakvilles, and stuff like that are in play.
Doesn't seem region specific too. I mean, aside from Quebec, you're saying they're also down in the battlegrounds in Atlantic Canada. That's a really bad sign for them. So what do you think is driving this?
I think fatigue. Basically they've been in power since 2015, and some people are tired. And in Atlantic Canada, the Liberals will still do well, but it just won't be kind of a lock across the board. So I think regardless, we'll see some losses for the Liberals, but they'll still do well in that region. But the thing is that when you're in a minority situation, every seat counts. So if they lose 2 or 3 ridings in Atlantic Canada, where are they going to find those ridings? And the same thing happens. Same thing applies in the GTA. BC is going to be really super interesting because the NDP and the Conservatives are both doing well in British Columbia, and the Liberals are not doing as well. Those 3-way races could actually benefit the New Democrats. So watch out for the New Democrats to do well in British Columbia, and the Conservatives to do well in BC. The one good piece of news is Quebec. So Liberals might pick up some seats in Quebec. There's been some pressure on the Conservative numbers. The Bloc will still do well in the province of Quebec. Maybe they'll lose a couple, but the thing is Quebec is the one outlier on that front for the Liberals.
Nick, I'm assuming the Liberals are now hoping to hang on to that governing deal with the NDP for dear life.
Oh, absolutely. I can't see, we saw a budget that wasn't an election budget. The Liberals have telegraphed they don't want an election for 2023. I think the next window would realistically be the budget in 2024, which could be an election budget. The Liberals are probably hoping that if there's a little dip in the economy, that it happens in 2023. Things come back to normal at Q4 2023. They feel a little better at the beginning of 2024, and then perhaps I think that's the first window that really opens up seriously for for an election.
Nick, as always, it's a pleasure. I think we'll leave it there for this week.
Sounds good.